We used to go camping every summer, Mike and I, with nothing but a tent, a cooler, and each other. We'd lie under the stars and talk about everything, our dreams, our plans, the names we'd give our future kids. That was a long time ago now. We hardly spoke unless it was about bills, dinner, or how loud the TV was. For our 45th anniversary, I suggested we do something simple, something us. Let's go camping, I said, half smiling, stirring the stew on the stove. Mike barely looked up from his phone. Camping? At your age, you can't even sleep through the night in a bed. His words stung more than I let on. I laughed it off like a joke, but my heart folded in on itself. Just for a weekend, I said gently. Remember Silver Rock Park? We loved it there. He finally looked up, but only to roll his eyes. Are you really serious? I'm not dragging your bad knees and sore back into the woods just so you can pretend you're 20 again. That night, we did go to the campsite with a group of his work friends, not to be together, not to reconnect, but so he could show them he still had an adventurous wife who tried. He told them stories about the old days, laughing at how I once got lost looking for firewood. I laughed along, but something inside me cracked like dry bark at the fire. He turned to me, a beer in one hand, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, she wanted to do this one last time before her hips give out. The group chuckled politely. I didn't. I stared into the flames, my chest tight, my hands clenched in my lap. I wasn't too old to camp. I was too smart to stay wet. I wasn't respected. The fire snapped and hissed while I sat frozen beside it. My face was warm from the heat, but the chill inside me wouldn't leave. Mike turned back to his conversation like nothing had happened. They talked about politics, fishing, something about their retirement plans. I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about how I used to feel in the woods, free, young, curious, and now I felt like luggage. He didn't mean it maliciously, I told myself. Maybe it was just a joke. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore. The jokes had teeth, and I was the punchline. That night, I slept in the tent beside Mike. He snored like always. I lay there, eyes wide, staring at the nylon ceiling. I felt like I was in a coffin. I thought about packing my things and leaving right then, just walking out into the trees. No plan, no goodbye, just gone. But I waited. I waited until morning, because I wanted to leave when the sun could see me, when I could see myself clearly. And when I left, I wasn't going to run. I was going to walk out tall. If someone ever told you you were too old to dream, too old to start over, like, comment, and subscribe, because some fires don't fade. They spark revolutions. I woke before the sun did. Mike was still snoring, curled like a child in his sleeping bag. I watched him for a moment, not with love, but with disbelief. How had I spent nearly half a century beside a man who saw me as old, brittle, ridiculous? I moved quietly, like I had so many mornings before. But this time, I wasn't making coffee or brushing my teeth. I was leaving. I packed my bag carefully, only what mattered. One change of clothes, my water bottle, a compass I hadn't used since '92, the small photo of my mother that lived in my wallet, my journal, a matchbox. I left the ring. I zipped the tent flaps slowly and stood outside, inhaling the pine. The world smelled fresh, free, like it had been waiting for me to return. I wrote the note on a page torn from my journal. Gone camping. Alone. Don't wait. I left it on his pillow. I didn't check my phone. Didn't second guess. I tucked it deep into my pack and turned down the trail. Not toward the parking lot, but into the woods. No maps, no GPS, just me and the memory of where freedom once lived. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter the world became. Birds rustled. A stream murmured somewhere in the distance. My breath sounded louder than it should have. I kept walking. After about an hour, I found a small clearing. The trees opened up just enough to let sunlight pool onto the soft moss below. It wasn't a campsite. It wasn't anything official. That's why it felt perfect. I dropped my pack and sat on a fallen log. My knees ached, my back pulsed. But I didn't complain. I was here, not in a house full of silence, not beside a man who thought I needed permission to feel alive, not beneath judgment or pity. I was here. For a moment, I cried. Not loud, just soft, steady tears sliding down my cheeks like a release valve had finally opened. This wasn't a rebellion, it was a return. I built a fire. I failed the first time, then the second. But the third time, the flame caught, and I smiled, because I was still learning, still burning. What happens when you leave without knowing where you're going, only that you can't stay where you were? I followed the sound of running water the next morning. My boots were still damp from the night before, and my muscles groaned with every step, but I smiled with each ache. It meant I was moving, that I hadn't turned back. The creek curved through the woods like a ribbon, its banks lined with smooth stones and wildflowers. I knelt beside it, cupped my hands, and drank. Cold, clean, alive. I washed my face in the stream. The shock of the chill woke every inch of me. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps. I stood fast, heart racing. I hadn't seen another soul since leaving camp. Out from the trees came a young woman, maybe in her 30s, wearing a ranger jacket and holding a clipboard. She blinked at me. "You okay, ma'am?" "I'm better than I've been in 40 years, I said, straightening up. She laughed light and honest. Didn't expect that answer. Her name was Lily, ranger for the northern section. She asked if I was lost. "No," I said. "I finally found the place I was trying to remember." She looked me over. "Most people your age aren't out here alone." I raised an eyebrow. Maybe that's the problem. We sat by the creek for a while, swapping stories. Lily told me she joined the Rangers after leaving a bad marriage. Said she found more peace in trees than in people. I understood that more than she knew. She didn't press me about my situation, didn't ask for a backstory. That made me trust her. I asked if there were rules about camping where I was. Technically, yes. Realistically, if you're not hurting the land or yourself, I'm not dragging you back. I smiled. Then I guess I'll be careful. She pulled a small wrapped sandwich from her pack and handed it to me. "Trade you for some of that fire-starting wisdom." I laughed. "Deal." That night, I wrote in my journal by the fire. My handwriting was shaky, but my words were strong. I met someone who didn't look at me like I was fragile. She saw me like a tree weathered, yes, but rooted. Lily came by again the next day. "Just passing through," she said. But I noticed the way she sat a little longer than necessary. "We talked about animals, books, dreams we'd abandoned," she said. "You remind me of who I want to be." And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel old. I felt needed. I felt seen. Is it possible to become someone else by simply stepping into who you were meant to be all along? The storm came without warning. One minute the sky was clear. The next it was bruised with clouds. The wind ripped through the trees like it had a personal grudge. My fire hissed out before I could shield it, and my tarp snapped free from one corner. I scrambled to tie it down, my fingers stiff with cold. Rain poured in sheets, soaking me to the bone in minutes. Thunder cracked so close it rattled my ribs. For a moment, I panicked. I was 67 years old in the middle of the woods, alone, drenched, and scared. My hands shook. My mind raced. I heard Mike's voice echo inside me, cruel and smug. "You're too old for this." And I almost believed him. Almost. But then I thought of the fire I built, the creek I drank from, the journal in my bag, filled with pages of me rediscovering myself. I wasn't dying out here. I was living. So I dug my heels into the mud, retied the tarp, and sang an old folk tune under my breath to drown out the thunder. The storm didn't break me. It baptized me. Morning came slow and silver. My clothes were wet, but my spirit was dry. I stood in the fog, staring at my makeshift camp. It looked like a mess, but it was my mess. A life I built with my own tired, stubborn hands. I hung my clothes on a low branch to dry and gathered soggy firewood. My fingers were raw, but they worked. I boiled water, burned the first oatmeal, ate the second batch with a quiet pride. Then I sat on the log and opened my journal. Last night, the sky opened and screamed. I screamed back, and somehow, that felt fair. I think storms don't come to punish us. I think they come to show us what we can survive. Later, Lily showed up, drenched from the trail. Her face lit up when she saw me. "You're still here," she said. "Where else would I be?" She sat down and shared her own storm story, how she once got caught in one during ranger training and cried in a porta potty for 2 hours. We laughed until our ribs hurt as the fire warmed us. I looked at her and said, "Do you think it's crazy that I left everything behind?" Lily shook her head. "I think it's braver than anything I've ever done." We sat in silence for a while, not because we had nothing to say, but because we finally didn't need to explain ourselves. Can silence be louder than any storm we survive? It started with a craving for coffee. I'd been out there nearly 3 weeks, living off creek water and powdered milk. But that morning my mouth ached for something warm and real. I tucked my hair into my cap, packed my things, and made the long walk to a gas station. About 10 miles south of Camp. The place smelled like burnt rubber and old newspapers. I bought a steaming cup and a granola bar, then sat down on the curb outside. That's when I saw it. A stack of local newspapers sat under a cracked plastic cover beside the vending machine. The headline stopped my heart. Retired woman missing husband pleads for safe return. There it was, my name, big and bold, my face, too, in a photo from 4 years ago. I looked tired even then. I picked up a copy and read it slowly. Mike told the paper he woke up and found me gone. Said he was terrified. Claimed I was confused, possibly ill, and begged anyone with information to call his cell number. My hands trembled. Confused. I'd never been clearer. There was a quote from him that made me laugh out loud. She's not well. She has trouble remembering things. She could be in danger. No mention of the campfire, the insult, the years of being spoken to like a child or a chore. Just a worried husband putting on a show for the neighbors. I folded the paper and stuffed it into my backpack. Not to save it, just to keep it out of sight. I didn't need to carry lies in my hands today. I needed to do something else. Back at my shelter, I sat cross-legged on the pine needles, pen in hand, journal open. I didn't write in it. I ripped a page out instead. Then, carefully, I wrote a note, not in anger, not in spite, but with the weight of every word carrying years of silence. Mike, I'm not missing. I'm not sick. I'm not confused. I walked away because you stopped seeing me, because you laughed when I said I wanted to feel alive again. Because when I looked into your eyes, I didn't see love. I saw someone waiting for me to shrink smaller and smaller until I disappeared. Well, I did disappear, but not the way you hoped. I'm not lost. I'm just finally found. Do not come looking. G folded the letter into thirds and sealed it in an envelope I'd kept dry with my journal. A few days later, when Lily offered to drop into town to file trail reports, I handed it to her. No return address, I said. She nodded, understanding everything I didn't say. That night, I sat by the fire with my mug of creekwater tea and watched the stars flicker. Somewhere out there, Mike would read that letter and finally know I hadn't wandered off like a lost dog. I had chosen to leave the leash. What does it feel like when the world finds out you're not a victim but a woman with a map in her hand? The leaves were starting to change color. I'd been out there long enough to see the green turn to gold, and I didn't miss a single day of it. Lily and I had fallen into a quiet rhythm. She checked on me every few days, never hovering, never prying. She brought supplies, sometimes instant coffee, bandages, even a tiny folding stool for my knees. I didn't ask for help, but she offered it like a neighbor, not a rescuer. One afternoon, she brought a mirror. It's silly, she said, pulling it out of her backpack, but I figured you might want to see yourself. It was a small hand mirror, the kind you'd find in a hotel bathroom, the edges slightly cracked. I hadn't looked into a mirror in weeks. I didn't think I wanted to, but I took it from her anyway. At first, I barely recognized the face staring back. My skin was sun-kissed, weathered. Wrinkles sat deeper on my cheeks, around my mouth. My hair, wild and gray, curled around my face like it was finally free. There were smudges of dirt on my chin, a scratch near my ear, but my eyes were clear, not dulled by routine or glassy from sadness, not tired from being dismissed or ignored. They were awake. I studied that face for a long time, not to fix it, not to criticize, but to meet it. I see her, I whispered to myself. She was in there the whole time. Lily didn't ask what I meant. She just smiled. Looks like a woman who could build her own cabin, she said. I handed the mirror back, but I kept the image in my heart. Because that face wasn't a stranger anymore, it was mine. Later that evening, I gathered the items I'd collected over the past few weeks. Branches, scrap rope, a tarp Lily had gifted. Meond started building something more permanent than my patchwork shelter. I wasn't an architect, but I had strong hands and a vision. I drove stakes into the dirt, layered sticks, wrapped the corners with tension knots I remembered from my childhood. I scraped my knuckles raw, fell twice, cursed once, but I kept going. Lily came by the next day and stared at the half-finished frame. Are you building a shack or a kingdom? Both, I said, wiping sweat from my brow. I was sore for 3 days, but every time I saw that structure take shape, I felt proud, not because it looked good, but because it looked like work. Mine. One night, sitting beside the fire, Lily shared something personal. My mom's your age, she said. She doesn't do much anymore, watches TV, complains, waits. I poked the fire and didn't speak. I wish she could see you, she continued. You make getting older look powerful. I didn't cry, but something bloomed in my chest. It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about becoming. I opened my journal that night and wrote, "Today, I built shelter with my hands, but the real shelter, I built it inside myself." Then I smiled at the flames. Because the fire didn't scare me anymore. It warmed the woman I'd finally come home to. Can we grow stronger, not by changing who we are, but by remembering who we were before they told us to shrink? He found me in October. I should have known it was coming. Word spreads fast in small towns, especially when someone's husband is crying to anyone who listens. He must have asked a ranger, maybe even followed Lily. She never said, and I never asked. I didn't blame her. I was at the creek washing my socks when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew that gait, heavy, unapologetic, familiar in the way gravity is familiar, always pressing, never asking. "Janet." His voice was smaller than I expected, like the woods had swallowed some of his authority. I stood slowly, turned to face him. Mike looked older than I remembered. Maybe I looked older too, but I stood taller. He took a hesitant step forward. "I just wanted to talk." I nodded toward the campfire ring. "Then, sit, talk." He did. I made tea while he looked around at the shelter, the supplies, the logs I'd carved into chairs. His eyes landed on the journal by the fire. "You've really been living out here?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." He looked uncomfortable. That was new. "I didn't know it was that bad," he said finally. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I stirred my tea. "You didn't mean to," I said softly. "But you did." For a long time, he nodded, but he didn't apologize. He just sat there, trying to figure out how the woman he once called fragile had built her own world without him. I didn't offer him comfort. I didn't owe it. We talked for an hour, mostly him asking questions I didn't bother to answer. He wanted to know if I was okay, if I'd come back, if I still loved him. I didn't respond. Love is complicated when you spend decades being talked over, dismissed, forgotten. Eventually he stood and dusted off his jeans. "You're really not coming home." I looked around at the trees, the cabin I was building, the place where I'd laughed with Lily and learned to keep myself warm. "I am home," I said. "Home," I said. He nodded slowly, not because he understood, but because he knew he couldn't change my mind. Before he left, I handed him a tin cup of tea. "Take this," I said. "You'll need it on the way back." He took it, holding it like it was proof. I didn't hate him. I just didn't belong to him anymore. As he disappeared into the trail, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't doubt myself. I just sat by the fire, warming my palms, listening to the wind carry the last of his footsteps away. That night, I burned the last page of my wedding journal. I watched the ink curl into ash and rise. It wasn't rage, it was release. I added a new page to my current journal. He saw me, finally, but it was too late. You don't get to come back after turning someone into a ghost. The fire crackled. I poked the embers and smiled, because the only thing left to burn was the past, and I wasn't living there anymore. Can peace exist in the same place where pain once lived, if you're the one who rebuilt it? 1 year passed like a quiet drumbeat. I didn't count the days. I counted the changes. The shelter I built was now a home roof patched with bark, walls reinforced with pine. I had a small stone path I'd made from the creek to the fire pit, a table carved from a stump. My handwriting had grown stronger. My arms, too. I could lift firewood without wincing. I never went back to Mike, never even called, and he never returned. Sometimes I wondered what he told people, that I lost my mind, that I vanished like a ghost in the forest. Let them wonder. I started publishing short essays in a nature magazine under my maiden name, May Carter. I never thought I'd see my words in print again, but the editor said my story sounded like poetry wrapped in bark and bone. Lily brought me a copy of the first issue. We sat on the log bench and read it aloud together, laughing every time I used a word like gumption or grit. She'd become more than a ranger. She was family now. She'd even brought her daughter by one afternoon, a quiet girl named Hannah, who reminded me of myself at Nankuras, observant, always looking at the sky like it was speaking. That night, Hannah gave me a drawing. It was of me, standing tall next to a tree, holding a walking stick. "You look strong," she said proudly. I folded the picture into my journal. Tears in my eyes. I feel strong, I whispered, and I meant it. The anniversary of my leaving came on a crisp morning in October. I stood at the edge of the trail, the same one I'd stepped onto when I left that campsite without a map or a plan. The leaves danced across the forest floor. A soft wind brushed against my cheek like a kiss from the universe. I carried no sadness, only peace. I'd become the kind of woman I'd once admired but never believed I could be: independent, grounded, full of stories that didn't need anyone's approval to matter. I took out my journal and wrote my final entry. 1 year ago today, I disappeared, not from the world, but from the cage I let myself live in. Today, I am not missing. I am finally found. I closed the book and placed it beside the fire pit for the next soul who might need to read it. Maybe they'd be young, maybe old, maybe tired of being told who they're supposed to be. Whoever they are, I hope they feel what I feel now. Not rebellion, not revenge, but return. Return to self. I took one last walk through the trail, my boots pressing new prints into old ground. The wind carried my hair, now short and silver, like a flag waving in quiet triumph. And as I sat by the creek one final time that day, I smiled and whispered to the water, I wasn't too old to camp. Then I laughed softly, was too alive to be caged.